Florida resident. I grew up in New Jersey, but I've been living here for more than 40 years. My first job in aviation was sweeping hangar floors at Pompano Air Center, or I'm sorry, Pompano Aviation, back in 1978. Became a flight instructor. I taught at Cav Air for a year at FXC, and then I jumped right into flying Learjets. Went from 172 to flying a Lear 24, which I'll tell you why that was sort of a big jump in a minute. As I mentioned earlier, you might have heard, I'm not an engineer. I'm a liberal arts major. Dale asked me to speak about any topic I wanted, and I figured, well, you know, it's an engineering crowd here at the EAA, so I'll try to figure out where the best microphone is. I would do something about the aerodynamics of the Learjet, the handling characteristics, because it was kind of a peculiar airplane. Also with me today is Rich Farmer. Rich, former Air Force pilot, United guy. We flew Learjets together. So after I do the sort of semi-dry engineering aspect of the Lear, and we're going to talk about what it was actually like to fly the airplane. And we did a lot of charters in South America back in the 70s and 80s. So the Learjet, as you guys may know, was originally designed by the Swiss Air Force to be a fighter interceptor. This was the airplane that the Learjet was derived from. Oops, sorry, thanks. It was the Swiss P-16. They only made two. It was designed to defend Switzerland against Russian bombers, and was also designed to do some ground support. And you can see some of the characteristics of the airplane that kind of match the Lear: the tip tanks, the wing, and then the main landing gear a little bit. The airplane, they built two, both crashed, and then the Swiss government decided just to buy some British, I think, Hawker Hurricanes, does that sound right? Some kind of other jet interceptor. So anyway, Bill Lear comes along, and he bought the blueprints from the Swiss government. And his idea was to make the Learjet. And here's the plan form view of the P-16. And you'll see now the next picture. Here's the Lear 23. This is serial number 1. You can kind of see the wing is almost identical. And you look at the wing too, and you'll see how clean it is. And I'll get to that, why that was kind of important in a minute. So Lear 23, this is serial number 1. This airplane was picture was taken just before it crashed. So you see where I'm kind of going with this. Serial number 1 was doing a test flight with the FAA on board for certification, and they took off with the speed brakes extended. So crashed at the end of the runway. Everybody got out. They didn't kill anybody. But right from the very beginning, the airplane was a little bit of a problem. And the reason being, I think, was, and again, I'm a liberal arts major. If anybody here is an engineering guy or gal, help me out. But I think, from what I know, the design ethos back in the 50s and 60s for jet airplanes was, let's just build it as fast as it can go, as high as it can go. We're not going to really care too much about the handling characteristics, the ergonomics. That's kind of the pilot's problem. And the original Lear, and that's what Bill Lear did as well. He basically took the wing off the fighter and just put a passenger fuselage on it. He did change the tail from the cruciform over to the T-tail. Much better look. So anyway, in this picture, you'll notice the airplane looks really sleek. I mean, it is a good-looking airplane. But the reality was it was kind of dirty aerodynamically. There wasn't any fairing between the wing and the wing roots, between the wing and the tip tanks. The engine struts also weren't faired very well. So it was just a kind of a slapdash design. They put it together, make it look good, make it fly fast, but it needed a lot of work. Also, in this picture, this is a head-on. You can also see the airplane didn't really have any camber. So all these things together meant the airplane really didn't handle very well. The Lear had what we called a straight wing. It was swept. The wing was, in fact, swept back. But by swept, what we meant was it had had basically no camber. It was almost like flying a sheet of plywood through the air. No camber, so it had really bad Dutch roll characteristics. Straight wing, so it was really nasty. As a matter of fact, NASA did a lot of tests with the airplane, and they said once you got outside or near the edge of the envelope, either high speed or low speed, the handling characteristics, and these are NASA's words, extreme. And what that meant was the airplane crashed a lot because two things would happen. The airplane was originally certified to fly up to 51,000. So you get up that high, you were in Coffin Corner where the low speed and the high speed buffet was just within a few knots. So you get a little turbulence, and then all of a sudden the center of pressure would shift back on the wing and you get mock tuck. I'll get back to that in a second too. Low speed characteristics, same deal. The airplane, once you got, it didn't really give you any warning before it stalled, no aerodynamic warning. It would just drop off. The wing, one wing, and you never knew which one it was. It would go one way or the other. And there were a lot of accidents because a lot of the pilots that were flying the Lear in the beginning were guys like me coming right out of general aviation. These were guys flying corporate Beech 18s, DC-3s and stuff. No experience, no training flying jets. They basically, the boss bought the airplane and they jumped in the jet and they started flying it. And they started crashing it. The other problem we had down here in South Florida is a lot of the charter operators flew the Lear, and low budget operation, and you're always pushing the airplane to the limit. It's like, okay, you got to go to New York. It's really a 2.5 hour airplane, 2:45 airplane. Well, from here to New York is about 2.5 hours, so you never landed with enough gas. There was always pressure to just make things happen. And if you wanted to do things, quote unquote, the right way, you know, you might not have your job the next day. So these things all together made the airplane really difficult to fly, made it prone to crashes. The airplane had twice the accident rate of all the other corporate jets of its time. I mentioned the other thing about the airplane is this is a Lear 24. The first airplane was a Lear 23, and then they made some aerodynamic modifications. They realized that the airplane wasn't flying very well, so they did make a few mods to the airplane, and they turned it into what they called the 24. Anyway, the thing about most of the Lears was, if you look at the tail, you can see that the vertical stab and the rudder are actually pretty big. The problem is, if you look at where the exhaust, the arm between the exhaust and the rudder is, it's really short. It was a short coupled airplane. So on a V1 cut, engine failure on takeoff, when you low airspeed, high engine thrust, you had to use all the rudder. I mean, one instructor once said, when somebody asked him, how much rudder should you use on a Learjet on a V1 cut? And the guy said, well, let me put it this way. I've never seen anybody use too much rudder. And as a result, there were a lot of accidents during training during V1 cuts. So that was an issue. Now here's another picture of the planform. And again, you can see how the airplane is pretty clean. The top of the wing, I mean. And this is what we call by the straight wing. So when they realized they were having a lot of handling problems with the airplane, they started doing some band-aids to the aerodynamics. We'll try that one. Yeah, that's good. Maybe this will work better. Maybe not. I'll just try to talk really loud.
I think you're better talking loud.
Yeah. All right. So one of the mods they did on the airplane is they curved the leading edge a little bit. So that gave it much better handling characteristics during slow speed. The other thing is they added vortex generators by the ailerons, and that helped keep the airflow from separating over the ailerons, and that helped both high speed and low speed handling. Because at high speed, the airflow would start to separate, and you get what we call aileron buzz. There was a little bit of a vacuum there. You could feel it in the yoke. You get this buzz in the ailerons. It also helped during slow speed, kept the ailerons effective during slow speed as well. That was one of the fixes. Random picture, that's a typical cabin configuration of the Lear. Once they built the Lear 24, it was a popular airplane, so they decided to stretch it, and they made the 25, which is the same airplane, just an extra 4-foot-long fuselage. Then they came out with the Lear 35, which I think was the best airplane they made. It had big turbofan engines on it, and they made some more aerodynamic fixes to the wing, which I'll get to in a second. The problem with the 35 was, it was even more overpowered, same rudder, and they had a lot of V1 cut accidents as well.
Great. What's a V1 cut?
Thank you, yes. So in any transport category airplane is certified by FAR 25 to be able to have enough performance to a 2-engine airplane, or 4-engine, to take off down the runway, lose an engine, at what we call V1. And then at V1, you're able to either stop the airplane in the remaining amount of runway or take off on one engine. So we would practice this all the time. Any kind of pilot flying a transport category jet airplane is going to practice V1 cuts. It's probably one of the most dangerous maneuvers you can do in the real airplane because you're close to the ground, you're slow, so you don't have a lot of rudder effectiveness, and there were a lot of accidents as a result. As an aside, the closest I ever quite, I got close to being killed several times in an airplane, but one of the times was in doing a V1 cut in a 35. I wasn't the flying pilot. I was sitting in the back watching a training flight. That's another long story I won't get into. But anyway, the 35 also had a wing extension. You can see in this picture a little bit. You have a swept wing, and then they added an extra 3 feet at the end. And I'll point out why that was kind of interesting in a minute here. Here's a really good picture of the vortex generators. And that really helped, again, the performance. The other modification they did was what they called the Century 3 modification. That was a stall fence along the entire chord of the wing. Also, instead of vortex generators, they put these strips in front of the ailerons, and they were called boundary layer energizers, right? BLE, boundary layer energizers.
That's right.
Oh. Is it not?
Is this okay?
Yeah.
Try it.
You want to try? Is it now? It's not working at all. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and hold it from the bottom.
That's one too. The problem is, guy's back right there.
Oh, buddy. Okay.
Or it sounds more staticky when the laptop goes near the microphone.
And hold it.
Yeah,
All right. Sorry, guys. Here's another close-up of the stall fence. Made a big difference. But again, the problem was the fundamental design of the airplane was, I won't say it was flawed, but it was not the best. So it was just Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid. And it constantly had problems with the airplane. Another idiosyncrasy of the Learjet was the tip tanks. We carried 1,500 pounds in each tip, and if you would fuel one side, we'd fill one side before filling the other, well, that would happen. Or if you had a leaky valve. Can't tell you how many times I walked up to an airplane that looked like that. All right, now we're going to transition into the crazy part of what it was like to actually fly the airplane. Back down here in the 70s, a lot of charter operators started getting Learjets. And we flew them all around the Caribbean, all around South America, and of course all around the U.S. as well. And the general ethos of the charter company was, you know, we'll fly you anywhere, anytime, anyhow. We don't care. As long as your credit is good, we're taking you. And it was a real cowboy environment. And I want to have Richard come up here right now. We're going to start talking about, tell a couple stories about what it was like to actually fly the airplane back then too. And one last picture to show you, give you an idea of maybe what it was kind of like. This picture was taken coming out of FXC about, I don't know, 20-some years ago. And, oops, actually that's not the right picture. A friend of a friend of a friend, I won't say who, they did a formation takeoff out of FXC one day. And this was just kind of typical of the culture of the Learjet pilots back in the day in the 70s and 80s. Here's the 235s coming out of FXC. So with that in mind, Rich, why don't you come on up? We'll talk a little bit about flying Lear. When we first met, Richard was furloughed from United Airlines. He was flying Lears. He was a captain, I was a co-pilot, and actually he gave my training to get my type rating on the Lear. And I did my type rating with Bill Conrad. And then Richard went back to United, and I started flying captain on the airplane. So you got a story to tell, or I can start? Or
There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of stories to tell about the Lear. Everybody thinks the Lear is a really slick airplane. It's not. It's actually a very dirty airplane. Can you hear me out? Yeah. It's a very dirty airplane. And a funny story is when they transitioned from the Lear 24s and 25s, the turbojets, to the fan jet engines. The first time I flew the 35, and I was used to flying the 24s and the 25s. You just went as fast as you could go, and you went back to 41,000 feet. And that's the only saving grace the airplane had, because it was a very dirty airplane. One day we were sitting around at idle on the ground, and we were looking at the fuel flow, and we were going, you know what, that's the same fuel flow that we had at 41,000 feet. So the airplane just gobbled the gas at low altitude. Once you got up to altitude, you get into the thin air, and your indicator airspeed dropped down to about 210, 220, something like that. You could go a fairly good distance. So I got in the Lear 35, and I started flying like at 25, and we're going at red line, and we're climbing, and I get to about 35,000 feet, and it's like, it's not climbing anymore. Because all the parasite drag with those tip tanks and everything. So I figured out, well, maybe if I slow down, we have a little bit of extra lift to drag ratio, we can get to 41,000 feet, but that's the way the airplane was. And another thing, as far as the dirtiness of the airplane, if you look at the original pictures, the tip tanks kind of had a little tilt to them. They were tilted up. So, but the gas cap was in the center of the tip tank. So when you were putting fuel in it, you couldn't get fuel to the very front. You'd have a bubble up front. So guys figured out that some operators, they decided, you know what, why don't we put another gas cap on the front of the tip tank? So we'll fill it up from the front to get the tank completely full. That was one workaround. But another thing with the airplane was it didn't have great range. Like if we were going to go from here to New York, if the weather was bad in the Northeast, you had to stop for fuel somewhere. And it was just like, it was a pit stop, like a NASCAR pit stop when you pulled into the place. And the FPL operators, they got pretty good at it. They knew what we were doing. And they knew that the pilots could make the decision as to which FPL to go to. It wasn't the owners that made that decision. They make the decision from where you started to where you ended up. But we make the decision to what airport to land at to buy fuel. And they got really good at it. You pull up there, they have 2 fuel trucks. As soon as you stop, they'd be putting fuel in the tip tanks for you. And so they started realizing, the FBO operators, that, hey, the pilots are making this decision to come in here and buy $1,000 worth of jet fuel. So let's start giving the pilots some tchotchkes. And we used to stop at a place called Grand Isle, Nebraska. And Nebraska is Omaha. Omaha is Omaha steaks. So the FBO would give steaks to the pilots if they came in there to buy gas.
Or bottles of wine.
Or bottles of wine. There was one operator who was giving little small televisions. Plus,
we never made a decision based on who had the lowest cost gas.
No, it was never that at all. Never that at all. And to the guy at Grand Isle, the original Learjet had the tip tanks that were tilted up, and he realized, you know what? If we could somehow get the airplane tilted down, we could sell more gas. So you dug a trench in the ground, and you come in there, and you come in, and you go, and your nose wheel will go down, and you get the tip tank more or less level, and you pump more gas. It was good for us too, because we had more fuel on board. And it was like a price war between all these guys, but it was mostly giving the pilots tchotchkes. But
Yeah.
okay, one more story. There's another place. It's called Wilmington, North Carolina. If you're going to New York, you'd stop at Wilmington to get gas. So there was like 3 FBO operators at Wilmington. And when you land at Wilmington, you turn off the runway, and there'd be like 2 or 3 golf carts with girls in bikinis. Would follow me signs, trying to get you to go to their FBO versus somebody else's FBO. And that had an influence on people also.
Well, there was one FBO in Nebraska, I guess it was, or Kansas.
Grand Isle.
Grand Isle and
Flower Aviation.
Flower Aviation.
Yeah.
And they had line girls who dressed up, hot pants. You know, what was anyway, same thing. Cowboy hats, bikini tops, and you know they would fuel up and hand you the wine and the chocolate and the steaks and be on your way. And the flower girls were infamous. And you know, like Richard said too, the airplane was always fuel critical. It's surprising, all the crashes we had, none of them were fuel exhaustion.
No.
But once you decided to start down in the Lear 20 series, you were committed. You really didn't have gas to go anywhere else, so you had to know you could get into that airport. One last quick story to tell you a little bit about what it was like flying back in the 80s here in the charter. As many of you know, back in the 70s, 80s, the drug trade here was just everywhere. If you were in the aviation or the maritime industry, you could not see it. It was everywhere. And some of our customers, we thought, we never knew, possible deniability, we're in the business. You know, a 30-year-old guy shows up in a Ferrari with some, hot girlfriend, and he goes to Medellin, and he had a pretty good idea what he does for a living. Anyway, so I'm sitting reserve on a beeper in Fort Lauderdale. I was flying for a personal jet charter. And I got a phone call from our dispatcher. And dispatcher is kind of a misnomer because she was really just a 23-year-old who picked up the phone, answered the call, took the credit card information in the itinerary, and told us what to do. So anyway, I'm sitting home about 2 in the afternoon, and I got a call from Wendy. She was our dispatcher. She goes, okay, Greg, got a trip for you. Okay, good, good. Because the thing is, too, we all wanted to be airline pilots, so every extra hour jet time was like precious thing. We wanted to fly. Okay, so what's the trip? Okay, you got to fly down to South Caicos, pick up some people, and then take them back to Miami. Like, okay, you can do that. Says, well, and the thing is, South Caicos is a daytime only airport, so you got to get down there, and you got to leave before sunset. And I think sunset was about 6:30 p.m. this time of year. So I look at my watch, okay, get to the airport, fuel, flight plan, hour and a half trip down there, refuel down there, turn around, piece of cake. Okay, yeah, we can do that, not a problem. So she says, well, there is one problem. I go, what's that? She says, well, you have to find the passengers. I was like, what do you mean I have to find them? She goes, well, they're in jail. It's like, okay. It's like, he says, well, don't worry about it. You're going to fly their lawyer down. He's going to give you the whole story. Okay, great. So we take off out of executive, on the way down to Caicos, co-pilot's flying. I go in the back to talk to this attorney. He's some Latin Costa Rican guy, maybe 30 years old. He's dressed like $1 million, which you never really see flying in the Caribbean too much. Everybody's pretty kind of scruffy. Anyway, so I go, okay, so what's going on? He goes, well, my client owns an airplane that these guys were flying, and they were on their way from Costa Rica to Grand Turk, and they couldn't get in, so they had to divert to Caicos, and they got arrested. It's like, okay, well, what happened? I said, well, they were flying a DC-4, and they were flying to Turk in the middle of the night, and they get in range, and the Turk ATC guys thought that they were drug smugglers, so they turned off the runway lights, and they won't answer the radio. So it's like, okay. So they were getting desperate, they were getting low on gas, so they decided to divert to South Caicos. And I was like, well, South Caicos doesn't have an approach. It was, they don't have runway lights either. And he says, yeah, I know, but they were getting desperate, so they kind of just did their homemade approach. They flew a radio off Grand Turk VOR, descended to some altitude, and there was enough moonlight that they were able to land on the beach. So, okay. And they got arrested. Well, yeah, so what did they get arrested for? It's like, well, for drug smuggling and for attempted murder. Attempted murder, it's like, well, yeah, they landed and they came to a hallway in front of the governor's mansion, so they thought they were trying to assassinate the governor. It's like, all right, so now the rule of thumb in flying in the Caribbean was you never ask questions, right? And I'm thinking, this is a pretty outlandish story, but the other thing about it was you knew that no matter how outlandish any story you heard, it had to be true. Because the flying back then was just so wild. So, but even though I knew I wasn't supposed to ask, I asked. I said, okay, so what were they flying? He goes, well, they're flying beef. It's like, beef, okay. It's like, I didn't know Costa Rica was known for its beef. I said, well, it's not. It's that's real low quality stuff. You don't see it in the Miami market. They just take it to the Caribbean where it's more affordable. All right. So I go back up to the cockpit and tell the co-pilot the whole story. And he starts laughing. He says, really? Do you believe that? Yes. It's like, look, man, it's not my job to believe it or not. It's my job to take them to wherever they want to go. And that was just the beginning of the story. So then it went on from there. We ended up in Costa Rica instead of Miami that night. We had an in-flight fire. Another night I thought I was going to die. But anyway, so this was sort of what it was like flying over there in South Florida charter back in the 70s and 80s. And your stories from Tom Carell, who also is going to come on and tell stories that's even more wild. But anyway, so that's it. I don't know if you want to have any questions about the aerodynamics of the airplane or anything else about the airplane, but I don't want to take up too much time. Just quickly, yeah.
Are some of these stories in your book?
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you recall what might have been the last plane you flew before your first flight in Learjet? What did you fly last before your first flight in Learjet?
Guess what's on 172? Yeah.
You have any beef left over?
No.
One more question? Anyone have a burning question?
How many times in the Lear did you think you were going to die?
Well, other than just being short on gas,
That was frequent.
No kidding around. I thought it was the end of my life 2 or 3 times.
Two or three.
Yeah.
All right.